Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I'm going to talk about those financials released by Manchester United yesterday. Glazers not taking dividends for the first time in a while. What does it mean? What does it have to do with the sale? Should this be something to celebrate? Talk about the implications, of course, for January and beyond. So let's get right into it. Recording this just off the back of watching Brazil somehow be eliminated again by Croatia in the quarterfinals after conceding a late goal and losing on penalties. And unfortunately, this means three of our United boys are headed home in Casemiro, Fred, and Antony. What can you do? Crazy, crazy World Cup so far, and will continue to be. So I imagine I can't see it coming down a little bit. But let's talk about these United financials. So first, the news came out initially that United, the Glazers, the board of directors, so to make a couple things clear, the board of directors had decided not to do the semi-annual dividends for the Glazers for 2023. And that is the fiscal year of 2023, which is technically kind of where we're in now for football seasons. As they usually be paying out a dividend sometime this month, I believe. Now, one could take this to mean they're simply doing the right thing, not taking dividends, all of that. But the financials that came out for the quarter are actually incredibly shocking. Well, maybe not shocking because they're kind of what we expected, but shocking in terms of when you look at it, it's almost unreal how they've driven the club down to this point. The balance sheet that was released for Manchester United, and not to get into too many technical details from an accounting perspective and all of that, the simplicity of the matter is there's no money. United do not have the cash. Their cash and cash equivalents have been down to 24 million. And just to give you some perspective on this, how would I describe this in layman's terms? That's about 2 weeks of operations for Manchester United in cash. 2 weeks. Manchester United, one of the biggest clubs in world football, probably biggest in England, is essentially running paycheck to paycheck. Think of it that way. They're reliant on money coming in immediately every single month now just to pay the bills, make payroll, and keep the club functioning. If that's one way you could look at it. They're running a multi-billion-dollar business paycheck to paycheck. There's no reserves. There's no cash. If somehow they didn't get paid, money coming in, they wouldn't be able to make payroll, basically. So think of it that way. If you didn't get a paycheck and you're living paycheck to paycheck and your paycheck bounced one week, you couldn't pay your bills. That's the state Manchester United are in at the moment. Now, obviously, they have the revenues. It's a little bit more predictable in revenue to keep things functioning, but it's bad. Cash is bad. They've drawn down on the credit line that they had in order to pay for transfers and things like that. They've drawn down all the cash that they've had to pay for transfers and things like that. The total debt, 650 plus transfers owed, is now over 1 billion in terms of monies owed. Now, transfer debt is fairly ordinary, but it's very high. It's the highest it's ever been. On top of that, the overall debts are the highest they've ever been. And worse than that, the financing costs have increased dramatically to 30 million a quarter. Financing fees costs are generally the cost of servicing the debt that they have, and this is because interest rates have gone up and the debt is higher. So it cost 30 million in that quarter. That means 120 million a year in finance costs. And when you look at it in general, the simple outlook of Manchester United's finances is this: they don't have the cash. They don't have the money. And even getting out of this hole is getting more and more difficult because of the financing costs, because they're running at a negative due to the price and cost of servicing the debt. That's where it is right now. Now, this is not entirely unexpected. If you've been following since summer, this is somewhat of what I continued to say I expected to happen. No dividends. The last dividends, if you follow one of the recent videos, I said was paid on, their last dividends they paid was paid on debt. They used debt. They used the line to pay their dividends. There was no money. They used the line to pay their dividends. And so really all this comes down to is this. The no dividends doesn't mean I don't believe it means they're not taking dividends because the club is about to be sold and they're trying to keep all the cash in the club. There's no cash. They can't afford it. They literally cannot afford it. They don't have any profits in the fiscal year, and generally speaking, you cannot take dividends when you do not have any profits to speak of. And with the losses of the last 2 years, they factually kind of cannot take money out. I don't think it means that the club is about to be sold like today and they're trying to keep the cash in. It's a simple kind of consequence of running out of money. It's not them doing it out of the goodness of their heart either. No matter how they want to spin it, that is the case. They cannot afford it. Yes, they didn't have to do all those transfers, but that was the point. In summer, I kept saying, I don't expect Anthony, I don't expect these, because they didn't have the money. They don't. They didn't. The fact that they did this was, from a financial perspective, highly irresponsible. The club has been driven to death. Now, I'm not saying that isn't where the money should be spent in the club. The money should be spent on the club, but it's highly irresponsible because they cannot manage. They can't run the club any further. They cannot invest or pay for the things they want to pay for. So the financial outlook for the club is bleak. And this is kind of what's expected. So how does this pertain to the sale? Well, again, following from summer when I said about the sale news in the first case, and I said what's going to happen, I expected things to pick up during the World Cup if they were going to pick up. But what I always thought would happen, and this is where it's gone, is that they would be forced into a sale. And people didn't think that was necessarily the case, but that's why they're selling. They're being forced into it. They're being forced into talking about the takeover. They're being forced to look at it even though they didn't want to. The money ran out. They looked at a sale in summer and then started looking for other alternatives, minor investments, people taking over a small part of the club in exchange for equity, putting money in. Nobody wants it. Why? It's a sinking ship with the Glazers. Nobody's going to put money in and expect that under Glazer management, they're going to get their money back. Why would anybody do that? Why would anybody invest to buy a part of the club without a controlling interest in a club that is not profitable, that is being driven down, and where there's no faith in the leadership? You wouldn't. You want to replace leadership if you're going to invest in something like this that is on the downswing. If it was on the upswing, then you could get people to invest equity, to buy equity and say, yeah, we think this ship's going up with you at the helm. It's not. This ship is going down. It's sinking. So you don't back, a poor leader, and you don't buy in on a poor leader and expect to get a return. No one's going to put money in out of the goodness of their heart. So they looked for alternative investment, alternative ways of raising funds, and the only ways you can get that are someone buying equities, sponsors, which is not going well because the brand is a bit toxic at the moment, and player sales. And United is not a selling club, nor will it be a selling club. They do not have assets to strip, and if you strip those assets and sell off of the players that you may need for value, it may get you some money in the short term, but if it affects results, you're just going the opposite way. This has been coming for such a long time. United was not sustainable without results on the pitch, despite what Ed Woodward said many years ago. It's been a long time coming. They rode this boom that allowed in the Premier League and across football that allowed them to survive despite the results on the pitch and increase the financial results. That boom has slowed down thanks to COVID. The sponsorship slowed down with COVID. The money slowed down with COVID. The expenses rose with COVID. The interest rates are up since COVID. So all of that has resulted in them not being able to ride the wave of luck of the increased value of the club. They ran out of money. They spent whatever they could to try to get the club back competing in hopes that they would get them investment. And when that didn't work, they're forced to look at a sale and a takeover as the only route out of the financial situation. Now, I cannot see any other way. We actually have accountants and people in Discord have been talking to about this for some time, and it is the case. It is really bad. The financials are really, really bad. The money is not there. There is no cash. And there's not they're going to save a little bit of money from letting Ronaldo go per year. But there's no way to get the stadium done, there's no way to get the training ground done, and there's no way to buy more players without a huge influx of money or a huge cut in costs, and there's really no way to see that because any cut in costs for players leaving is going to have to be replaced. Free agents, if they let 8 or 10 of them go, that's all well and good, but you're going to have to buy players and add wages for that, so the savings are going to be minimal. If you make Champions League, you make a little bit more money, but the player wages go up too. And there were the whole thing that was said there was the expenses were actually higher despite, or the profit and loss was not better despite the wages being lower, because you lose a lot of revenue, the wages are lower. When you gain the revenue, the wages go up. It's kind of a wash, Champions League, in terms of the finances on that basis. So there's really, in looking at it, no real route out except a sale, unless somebody wanted to come in and buy a minor, stake in it, and just give them money in exchange for some equity. But there's no reason for anyone to do that. They've already looked at it, and that's why they have to confront the fact of a takeover, and that's why those talks are continuing. And it has to be sooner rather than later, because right now the club is bleeding money. Now, how does that pertain to Gakpo? As I've been saying for some time, Gakpo is the player Ten Hag wants in January. There was a report from Simon Mullock Mirror that that Luis Van Gaal had been missing calls from Manchester United, that they found his toilet in the his phone in the bathroom, and had missed calls from Manchester United. So that's very funny, but Ten Hag wants Gakpo. The only way he can get him is, of course, with Glazers spending. I'm not sure they'll do it. I'm not sure they'll spend on anyone. But with the savings made from Cristiano Ronaldo's wages, they could afford it within the current year budget. It's just a matter of whether they believe that budget is something they can sustain, or whether that budget is something they need to take those savings on to keep the club running, because they're not going to put money in of their own, right? So when I say need to, I mean need within the realm of how the Glazers run United. They're not putting their own money in, so do they need those savings from Ronaldo just to keep the club solvent through the season? They might, and that would mean no purchase of Gakpo. It also may be a matter of, how far along things get in talks with potential interested parties, where they see the sale is coming, March or April, like Simon Stone implied with his article, in which case they'd talk to them and say, yeah, we're going to spend this money, add this on here, it's going to help with top 4. New buyers would say, yes, that's fine. It's whatever. It's transfer debt, yes, but we're going to pay off all those other debts and get things in good shape, and the club is going to be self-sufficient. The important thing to grasp here, one final point that I want to state on this, when you look at those financials, they're so bad, but it only comes down to one thing: debt and financing. If they didn't have that debt, and they didn't have to service that debt, and they didn't have those finance charges, even with all the money being spent on transfers, which is more than enough, more than anyone else, the club would still be self-sufficient. It does not need a sugar daddy to come in and drop $1 billion on transfers. It can afford that. It needs someone to come in, take care of the debt, not suck the club dry, draining it with $1 billion spent on that debt. And that $1 billion could have been spent on the stadium. You can finance the stadium over $1 billion over 30 years like Madrid did and pay off $30 million a year. You can do that. And the club could afford it and all the transfers, as long as it's not being sucked dry. So it needs someone who cares about it. It needs someone who will, in the short term, invest, pay off the debts, and allow the club to spend, work out a good way, maybe even bring in some extra revenue streams or sponsors in that will help to fund that stadium, and then and the grounds renewal and all of that, and then the club on its own can afford anything it needs, much like Madrid can at this stage in time. So that's really the case, and so it's needed is somebody who cares, someone who's going to come in and take the right actions in the beginning, similar to what Bowley's doing at Chelsea. And then beyond that, they don't have to pump a ton of money in. They just have to do it right in the beginning. But the state of things are such that the Glazers are really being pushed out by the financial situation of the club. It's what was expected. It's where we expected things to go. It's the reason that they want to sell, and that they're having to be forced to look at it, that Joel and Avi have to. There's nothing left in the club for them. It's run dry. So this should be the end for them, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later, so that the team can get what it needs in January. Not that that's the first most important thing. Again, as I said in the last video, it's patience. If it means there's no purchase in January, it's still worth it in the end, and I still have faith in Ten Hag to get the club into the Champions League position, and then they'll be able to spend big time in summer to get him what he needs in the positions that he needs. But there's going to be a lot in flux by then if new owners come in. So this is hopefully it. these results should make it easier for buyers to have their discussions and know where the club are at now. It could be the end. It should be the end. By the end of this month, I expect we will hear a lot more. Thank you for watching this video. Enjoy the rest of the World Cup game with the one today and the ones on the weekend, as I won't be making a video unless there's something urgent that comes up. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. I'll see you in the next one.